Great. Hello and welcome to the first meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee for 2023. May I first welcome to the committee Rodri Guest, our new lay member. Welcome, Rodri. I'm sure you'll make a valuable contribution over the foreseeable future. We'll get right on with the agenda by noting apologies for absence. I've been notified of Tony Keir's absence for this meeting. Not aware of any others. Okay, we can move on then. Please, declarations of interest. I haven't been notified of any declarations of interest in advance, but I can see Martin's hand. Martin, please.
Yeah, as last year, the farm accounts are relevant to me because I'm a governor of Coleg Gwent and they're referenced in that document.
Thank you. Duly noted. I can't see any other members wishing to declare an interest. Okay, moving swiftly on to item 3, Public Open Forum. This is the public open forum element of the meeting. Wendy, have we received any representations from members of the public, or do any members of the public wish to address the committee?
No requests, Chair.
In that case, we're going to move very swiftly on to item 4, which is our action list. Thank you once again, Wendy, for the action list format's been tweaked, and that's really positive and it's much clearer. Let's look at Action 1. Action 1 talks about the list of key collaborations and partnerships. I note that's on the agenda just a bit later on, so I'm happy to close Part A of this action. Part B, I note it's to be confirmed. Andy, can you provide any helpful guidance in terms of how we intend to close this element out, please?
Thank you, Chair. Rich is going to provide the initial list of collaborations we've got on board, and my team are currently engaged with an audit around the governance arrangements, and we'll be duly reporting back into Governance and Audit Committee once we've drafted the report and discussed that with the relevant managers.
Okay, thank you. Action number 2, that's inspector cross-referencing report in terms of reference. That's on the agenda for later on, so I'm happy to close that without any further comment. Action 3 is the authority statement of accounts, noting that's still open. I also note that we were due to consider the final version of the accounts at today's meeting, but they've now been deferred until next month. John Davis, Head of Finance, would you be able to provide an update to the committee in terms of where we are with those accounts and the reason for the deferment, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it's been a little unfortunate. We were probably in quite a good position just before Christmas to bring the final statement of accounts for MCC to this committee meeting, but I think we've had a period where the budget and other pressing issues have probably called on the finance resources more than expected, and we haven't quite been able to get some of the final issues over the line and the queries that Audit Wales have raised. The good news is, I guess, that as of today, I think there's one issue outstanding. We're hopeful of having a semi-final audit report this week, and we're expecting those papers to be ready in good time for the next committee meeting. I think members will be fully aware of the national issues that have impacted us this year, particularly revisions to the code and guidance in December, and the delays that's caused to bringing the statements to a close. So I think not unexpected that we face the challenge in getting them over the line. But I guess a positive update, I guess, in totality from me.
Thank you. Is this authority an outlier in terms of not being able to finalise its accounts by this month end, please, John?
No, I'm aware of quite a number of authorities across Wales that still haven't met the deadlines that have been pushed back, and similarly across the UK, there's a significant number of authorities that actually still haven't had the 20 years, right? I'm working across 4 years. The 2021 accounts published in terms of the final audited statement. So, the national issues in play are causing an issue for everyone. What we have got is a near enough closed position that I think we can give some comfort to the committee as of today that it's nearing completion.
Thank you. Do members wish to make any comments or ask any questions of John at this stage, please? Martin.
Thanks, Chair. John, thanks. I understand where we are, and it's really, really inconvenient that the accounts are now crystallising now when we're in the middle of IMTP and budget setting. It's really awkward. I fully understand for finance staff. I just want to get a clear understanding of the deadline was whenever it was, July, and then the government override was to the end of January. We're not going to make the end of January. So hopefully, what's the consequences of not making the 31st of January? And if many are and we aren't, does that mean anything for us? And secondly, just so by way of administration, I would have expected to see a paper here today, because it was only when I had a pre-meeting with the chair I found out that the accounts weren't happening, and so I would have expected a paper to be in the bundle just saying where we are and why we are where we are.
Thanks. So, as I understand it, you're quite right. The deadline was pushed back from July, I think initially to, I think it was probably the end of November, and then further to the end of January. That was a Welsh Government discretionary deadline, and as far as I'm aware, there's no impact of us going past that deadline. But I appreciate it. It's not helpful. A running joke within the finance team that we're pre-planning for closure for next year, and we still haven't got published those final accounts. But I know Rachel from Audit Wales is on the line. Probably may have some more information in terms of that statutory deadline. But I think from my point of view, I'm comfortable that we are nearing completion. I appreciate a short paper probably would have been helpful for the committee, but I think simply time hasn't allowed us to reflect on that and bring it forward.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Rachel to come in at that point to provide any comments she wishes to. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to clarify on the deadline point, I suppose. The only deadline that's set out in statute, the statutory deadline, is the end of July. There's flexibility within those regulations that should you miss that deadline, you have to publish a notice. But once that's gone, it's gone. The sort of the subsequent deadlines, if you like, were sort of expectations from letters provided by Welsh Government. So November and January, they were Welsh Government expectations, I suppose, rather than hard deadlines. So just wanted to clarify on that.
Thank you, Rachel. I can't see any hands up, so thank you, John, for that helpful update. Move on to action 4. Noting that this is still open, I'm happy to close this. I looked at Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, just to confirm that he's happy to close this, and you take it forward as you see fit.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and just by way of, I guess, a verbal conclusion reached, I guess, because I've worked this through over recent weeks, subsequent to the point being raised originally by Colin Prosser, almost called you Councillor then, Colin Prosser, and we've had employment lawyer look over this. I've had a discussion with Matt Phillips, the monitoring officer, in his role as well for people services, workforce matters. And we sort of worked the conversation through. I've spoken to Andrew as well, because we're just trying to make sure that we've assessed the levels of associated risk, the sort of controls that we've got in place, and any history or experience of fraud or otherwise, and does it take us to a point of thinking that that step in terms of vetting is a necessary one? And I think we weighed up obviously the pros and the cons, and we feel there's no net benefit really to introducing it, because we've not got any history really of fraud in that area. We're comfortable in terms of obviously with the ongoing work of internal audit in terms of the control environment in and around that space. And I think probably the thing that probably gave me most comfort was when we looked into specific roles that concerned cash handling and the like. Those levels of roles are quite small in number within the council. They're actually even further diminishing as a consequence of obviously, particularly through the pandemic, a much greater use of digital means to transact. So yeah, I think it wasn't seen as a necessary step, but I'm happy to respond to that effect in writing. I've got no problem with that.
No, I don't think so, Peter. As I say, it's something I haven't actually worked through within my organisation yet to see, to look back into the history of that as to why we chose that route. But obviously, when we do see fraud, it is obviously a disappointment when we see that there was a history, that might have intercepted that crime on the way. But I think it's been given due consideration. I'm happy to leave it.
Yeah, and I think the key point that our employment law, because the employment law, you looked through obviously. What we are able to do and what we're not, and et cetera, and the key point was, and allied to part of your point there, that it needs to be considered in a proportionate manner, but more specifically to the nature of roles that may carry risk. And I think that's the lens I've applied and that we've applied in drawing a conclusion. And it's probably different, for example, for a police authority than it might be to a local authority, given the nature of roles, if you get to my point.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And the final action 5, is with Andy Roth, Chief Internal Auditor. Andy sent an email to us a week or so ago. I'm happy to close it without further sort of discussion. I see no objections. Thank you. We'll then move on to item 5, the collaboration and partnership report. Firstly, thank you for producing the paper. I thought it very helpful. I believe the paper is going to be introduced, at least initially, by Richard Jones, Performance Manager. So Richard, please assume we've read the paper, but maybe just draw out some key points for us. Thank you, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager for the Council. So this substantially picks up on the action list, as we've just covered, and provides you with a list of the key collaborations for Monmouthshire County Council. I'm just going to quickly talk a little bit about the work we've done to compile the list, and then a little bit about what's next, which again links to what we've already covered on the action list about the work Andrew and colleagues in internal audit are doing using the list. So a key focus in bringing this together is recognising the council has many collaborations, and in order to bring together a list that makes best use of your time, best use of officers and internal audit's time in reviewing them, we work quite hard on trying to refine it down, and in doing so and setting out the initial work, we tried to define a definition. What is a collaboration and what is a key collaboration to inform it? And it was quite difficult because the council is diverse, it has a diverse range of service areas and diverse range of collaborations as a result. But nonetheless, we needed something to guide us in order to robustly bring together a list before you today. So we took a few key elements into consideration. They're set out in the report. So we looked at whether it was providing providing a key service or delivery for Monmouthshire County Council. We looked at things like the resource contribution, whether that be staff, resource, facilities, etc. And we also had a look at the financial costs involved. And really then using that as a guide, we worked with director of management teams and lead officers for each of the collaborations to try and then define down the list for you today. The list gives you the name, description, and the key lead officer, broken down by each of the council's directorate. It's broken down by directorate, reflecting we worked with directorate management teams in bringing it together. There will definitely be other collaborations and partnerships the council is working in and involved in that aren't part of this list. But again, we're trying to refine it down to make best use of everyone's time in the process. I say it's been iterative as we've gone through it, and it's very likely this list may be larger than it needs to be as well. Part of the work in working with Andrew's team in internal audit will be to look at whether it can be refined down further, ensuring that the focus and time and effort is spent where it can have the biggest impact, and also it need to be kept up to date. So as things change, whether that's the existing arrangements, we enter into new arrangements, we'll need to maintain it. So that's sort of helpful, just sort of be useful to give you a bit of a background about how we've arrived at where we are. Very much it is a list of what the arrangements are, and I guess the key question for you as part of your remit is then how effective are they, and that's really comes into then the work that's happening now and what's next, and that's where, in terms of the work plan we mentioned about the second report coming due. So it's a list. I don't want to sort of take out Andrew's teams at work, but they're very much using this list to look at a sample of the partnerships and collaborations on the list to review and answer some further questions. And the answers to those will hopefully very much inform you around, assessment of have they got robust governance arrangements, what's the systems of control are in place, and that'll be important to inform your role as a committee. So in line with the recommendations, Chair, happy to take any questions, and also in line with that recommendation about a further report then coming before you, looking more then at the effectiveness informed by the internal audit work as well.
Thank you, Richard. So questions for Richard to begin with. Tony Eason, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Richard. And going through the lead officers on various aspects of the report, one little line, lead contract officers, Francis O'Brien, steering group to oversee delivery of 53 recommendations from the Burns Commission. Are we able to have access to, have knowledge of where that steering group is, where is it going, and will it deliver, or can it deliver, the 53 recommendations?
Sorry, I'll maybe just come in just briefly. I mean, I guess it's just a question, and it's really a reflection through to Richard in terms of what the scope and remit of this piece of work is, and distinct from, I guess, Councillor Reese's question, which I think is probably more in terms of the substance of the collaborations, its objectives, and whether it's fulfilling those, which I think is your question, Councillor Reese. But
yeah, it's just really to do with road issues, transport issues, which I understand the Welsh Government are not calling in, but are re-looking at.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a separate question that would need to be lodged with the relevant chief officer or senior officer to provide response or clarification on, and probably away from the nature of what we're looking at here in terms of the robustness of the governance arrangements or otherwise of these collaborations.
Could I ask Richard to take it forward to Chief the?
Yeah, well, I think for us, as Peter said, we focus on the arrangements. We can certainly raise that, but I think, there's a role there in terms of looking at delivery of these arrangements. And Chair, we've covered it as well about the roles of scrutiny committee as well, in looking at, are they delivering recommendations in this case? We can raise it, but conscious of the advice about it not being directly relevant, perhaps to the outcome we're looking at this report.
It's a fair point, Tony. Are you happy to raise it with the relevant officer?
Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to record my question today, that's all.
That's fine, thank you. Peter Strong, please.
Yeah, thanks, and apologies if my questions fall foul of the same issue as Councillor Easton's. Clearly, there's not time to drill down into the work of each of these bodies, but just a few points arise. On Flying Start, as I understand it, part of that arrangement is that the health visitors are employed by the Aneurin Bevan Health Board. I've been informed that those health visitors used to be attached purely to Flying Start, but now that they're been given more generic roles, and that's having an impact on the service. So I really want to ask, and this is probably one again to pass on to the relevant officer, is that situation creating a risk to our provision of the service, particularly given that it's a relatively narrow age range of children that get that provision. And if there's a long delay in assessments, because those health visitors are off doing other things, then that can severely limit what we're able to provide. Secondly, a question on Monovale. I note that that's a private finance initiative running for 30 years. I don't know when it began, when it ended. I know Monovale opened in 2006, but don't know if that's a corresponding date. I'd like to ask, is that running smoothly? There were lots of horror stories back in the day relating to other PFIs. Is that running well? And are there any sort of implications on things like interest rates and provision of services provided by the PFI agreement?
Peter, so if I may just interject, so thank you. These are all valid questions to be asked by an elected member. I'm not sure these are questions for this particular committee. And my suggestion, I look to Peter Davis just to make a nod or shake his head, that you take from the relevant officer. Possibly Richard can point in the right direction of the relevant officer if he's uncertain.
All right. Okay. I'll leave it there.
But no, thank you, Peter. Martin, please.
Thanks, Chair. I guess my question is about sort of next steps, really. It's a really helpful list and a very scary list. It's a long list. But, sitting here in this committee, we were worried about governance and audit. So I kind of want to just check particularly where there are budgets being pooled, that we make sure that there are robust governance arrangements, audit arrangements, reporting back arrangements that come back to this organisation. So just checking whether that's a next step.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason putting lead officers down is also they have responsibility there in terms of ensuring the arrangements that they are leading on from Monmouthshire County Council are in place and are robust. The report sets out what they are. Part of the reason they're linking in with Andrew's team using this is to look at then a sample of those to get that assurance around, are they effective, are those arrangements in place. So certainly that sample, I look to Andrew as well to agree that we'll go into that detail around assurance. They're drawing from that work. But it's a sample, so we won't cover everyone, but it'll certainly give us some indication. Obviously, any key themes then can be followed up.
Thanks, Richard. And just to add to that, in Richard's report on 3.5, it does outline the scope of the audit arrangements and what we'll be covering. The work is ongoing at the moment, so we'll be reporting back in due course, but it is on a sample basis. We can't do all of the arrangements we've got in place and with the resources we've got at the moment, so we'll be reporting back on a sample basis, Chair, and then the members can take a view as to where we go from there.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Colin, please.
Yeah, again, Chair, I don't know whether you can hold it as relevant. But, because we're talking about diverse things here, aren't we? But, I mean, I was looking at, just the general corporate governance of these partnership arrangements, whether there's anything, I don't suppose you can have a template because they're really different things, or whether you could have guidance around, because it's often held that funding can be disproportionately affecting one partner rather than another. And I know that Monmouthshire County Council, for instance, the Local Resilience Forum, I think that moved from Gwent Police over to Monmouthshire County Council, and how those decisions are in general made, and whether we're in these times of austerity, taking a disproportionate slice of the cake. So I'm not quite certain why we choose where we're statutorily obligated to, yeah, I understand those, but why we choose perhaps to take the lead where we don't necessarily have to, and the number of things that we're taking the lead, and those things that we are going to take or considering to take a back step on, whether there's any overall strategy around that we're considering. Is that a big enough question?
Yeah, I'll maybe just offer an initial comment, and then Rich can either correct me or otherwise. But I think just as a general rule of thumb, I think any public body, particularly within this current climate, will be taking an appropriate lens to looking at how collaboration can work to any individual public entity's benefit. Cost is a key driver, but the ability to be able to deliver key outcomes is of equal and paramount importance. But you need to have the right conditions in place. Partners need to be willing. There needs to be built upon trust in order for you to be able to work successfully within a collaboration. And in terms of who takes a particular lead or lead responsibility, that's generally worked through in how these discussions come together, and in many respects, in my experience, they are assessed on a case-by-case basis, because you've got to assess all of those factors in determining as to whether it's within your interests. And sovereignty will be an important point, that there will be good reasons often as to why collaborations, which may on the face of it look to be fruitful and worthwhile, as to why they don't actually happen. But Rich, I don't know whether you want to add further to that.
I think, yeah, thanks for that, Peter. I think part of the benefit of doing this work and through the committee and the further internal audit work is then to look at how we can learn in terms of, is there practice that can be developed that can help if you are looking at a new arrangement? Is there business cases, models, templates, etc. you can follow to gather that? Certainly, as a networked organisation and going around collating these with lead officers, people are talking to each other about, I've got experience of this, I've spoken to someone who's looking at this, so that happens, and some of them come with their own, structures and templates around them as well. But I think part of the benefit of having this list, keeping it up to date, and then looking at it further through the lens, internal audit colleagues are looking at it, is to look at then, is there shared learning that can take back then, so try to apply to these existing arrangements, or if someone is considering entering a new one as well. So I think hopefully this exercise itself can help that, but certainly in the work done with the lead officers, they have a lot of that in place, and they're also working with their colleagues either in Monmouthshire or in the partners they're working with to gather that best practice. Another practice they need to develop the arrangements.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking on then. So I mean, like the most recent one that seems to come to mind now is the NHS additional pressure on social care in order to relieve the burden on the NHS, and how Monmouth are going to deal with that collaboration arrangement going forward. With them obviously looking to move that burden, maybe for all the right reasons, but that could have quite an impact on our finances.
Okay, thank you. Rodri, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's less of a question for Richard, more of just a suggestion in terms of the report. We've got the lead contact officer, presumably the collaborations are tied to a post, not a person. So, seen as they're public documents, I think it'd be really helpful to have people's the job description, the job title of the people, because then it also gives us an idea of where it would sit in an internal governance structure as well.
Yeah, very good suggestion, and we'll add that. And it's right that it's linked to the post, not the person.
Okay, thank you. And then Ian, please.
Yeah, thanks. Pardon me. Thanks, Richard. I mean, obviously, this is a great document, but it must have taken quite a lot of time to compile. And I appreciate that. In terms of developing it, I think it will be good from our perspective, I think, to know on some of these where sorry, what the nature of our role is. Are we a member of, or are we actually responsible for? So like if we're talking about SRS, we know that SRS is hosted by Torvine, but we're still sort of quite a very active member of it. Some of these others are a little bit less. So, and it's just that to just get a sense of who is the lead organisation. Is there almost like an independent secretariat that is the lead organisation, and that we are sort of like board members of? Or is one of the authorities or one of the partners actually the lead organisation that is responsible for the governance and audit of which we contribute to? So I think that would just help us to get a better picture of all of these different collaborations. And then secondly, in that, having the lead contact officer, and as Rodri said, their job title as well as their name will be great. I just wonder whether it's appropriate to also say which scrutiny or other committee within the council would seem to be the natural home for any oversight of our work there, because obviously they're not, although we as governance and audit have a particular role around that side, that financial and governance side of things, we don't necessarily need to duplicate. If there's the Public Service Board, obviously, and some of those are going to go to the Public Services Scrutiny Committee. Some might go to Place or People Scrutiny Committee or Performance and Overview. It would just have a sense, and there's always going to be a bit of overlap, and I know it's not definitive, but I wonder whether it would be helpful just to get a sense of where they scrutiny function in this council most neatly sits for each of those partnerships, if at all. And maybe some of those perhaps don't need to be there, just in terms of that. I don't know if that's helpful. It would probably be helpful for me anyway, but whether it's helpful for you or not is a different matter. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you for those points, and I'll take them in order. And firstly, you reminded me to thank my colleague Robert McGowan, who was instrumental in putting this list together. Members of the council know he's our scrutiny officer, and he's put his scrutiny skills to good work here in tracking down these arrangements and scrutinising them. So thank you to Robert. Those are good points, Councillor Chandler. I think in terms of the first one, I think that will help us also, as I said at the start, this list may be refined down further and actually looking at our role within it. And we have asked some of those questions in putting them together. What's our role? Are we the lead? Are we a partner of? I think that may help us then in refining down into terms of those we may want to focus on most for our arrangements. So that's certainly something we can look to add and include. Similarly, around scrutiny committee, and probably link into a couple of the questions we've had more specifically about the arrangements and I suppose the delivery of these, adding that, and we'll show you where perhaps any reporting around the outcomes from these partnerships may go. But obviously reflecting on that, in terms of the scrutiny's forward work programme, it may mean that these don't go there routinely. That may be something that the scrutiny committees, for example, may need to consider. It could be something, Chair, and as a committee you consider off the back of this, is whether there needs to be greater oversight in terms of outcomes of some of these partnerships by scrutiny committees, and you can do that in your linking as well. So we can certainly add that. As you say, some of them may not sit exactly in one committee. They may be overlapping committees, but we can allocate those as best we can, and again it may help with that some of those questions around outcomes for some of these arrangements as well, and it may be further consideration either today or certainly when you have the internal audit report in terms of further scrutiny of these and where that most appropriately sits, which is a common theme when I present reports to you, because obviously there's lots of overlap with the variety of things we do as a council.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thank you all. Just to echo some of the points already made. So I think this is a good piece of work. It's really helped my understanding in terms of the various partnership arrangements. But I do think it's a first step. I think there's further work to do in terms of understanding how these various partnership and collaborations fit into the authority's core governance structures, how these various fora are overseen by elected members, the various scrutiny committees. I'm particularly interested in terms of the role of this governance audit committee in terms of overseeing the work of these fora. But I'd say, just to reiterate, it's a good first step. The next step up, is really understanding the authority's core governance arrangements. I do note it's reflected in part in the Constitution, but I do want a better understanding in terms of how all these various components fit together. But yet again, I think that's work we can take forward in a collaborative way, this committee and officers, over the course of the next 12 months or so. So in conclusion, we can note this paper, and thank you, Richard, thank you, team, for undertaking this good piece of work. Okay, we'll now move on to the next agenda item, which looks at the financial accounts for two bodies. What I'd like to do is to combine agenda items 6 and 7. What I'll start off by asking John Davis, our Head of Finance, to introduce the Welsh Church Fund's accounts, setting out key matters, assuming we've clearly read the paper, and then turn quickly then to Rachel Freitag of Audit Wales to talk us through the ISA 260. Once that's done, we'll then move on to the farm school endowment matter and follow a similar process. Hopefully that makes sense, but I'm sure people will tell me if it doesn't. So, but initially, John, please introduce the Welsh Church Fund accounts, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll take your key in terms of, assuming everyone's read the report. It's obviously quite a brief report. Members will be aware that the draft accounts were brought to this committee quite some time back now, actually in July 2022. Since that time, the external audit process has been ongoing. It actually didn't start probably until around about November time, and the reason for that, and that's normal. The reason for that is it usually follows a lot of the field work that's done on the main Monmouthshire audit, but as you heard earlier, they've concertinaed up a little bit this year in terms of those delays that we've experienced. A lot of work has gone into this. I think the audit period is quite short in terms of this, but my colleague Dave Jarrett is on the call, and I'd like to thank him in his work in bringing this to a close, and also colleagues in Audit Wales who have brought this together in a timely manner and enabled us to bring it forward by the required deadline to lodge with the Charities Commission, which is the 31st of January. In terms of findings, they are outlined in the report, but also in that appendix that's attached as well, which is the external audit ISA 260 report. I guess the main correction, just to bring to the committee's attention, is the correction in terms of investment income. So that was £50,000 that was incorrectly shown as income. That was quite simply down to a transfer from a custodian account into the Welsh Church Fund bank account. So we're comfortable that that was an isolated error, which has been corrected in the final statements. So, Chair, I think again, just to sum up, pleasing to note that there's an unqualified report delivered in terms of the Welsh Church Fund, and I'm hopeful that the committee will recommend lodging with the Charities Commission.
Thank you, John. Rachel, could you come in at that point, please, and talk us through the ISA 260? Thank you.
Yes, of course, no problem. John's covered most of it quite well, to be honest, so I'll just touch on the key points, really. Firstly, to say that the fund actually falls below our audit threshold. The level of expenditure doesn't actually require a full audit. You could have an independent examination of these accounts, but I think the authorities decided to go for a full audit to provide an extra level of assurance to the other Gwent authorities who are trustees of the fund. We've set our materiality at £58,000 for this year, which is a slight increase on last year. we're due to issue an unqualified opinion, clean bill of health. There were some minor narrative typos, things like that we identified, and the one £50,000 adjustment that John's already touched on. I'll leave it there, really. I'm happy to take any questions, but yeah, it's quite a straightforward audit process. And finally, I'd actually like to thank John and Dave and the team for supporting us in completing the work.
Thank you, Rachel. So questions in respect of this item to either John or Rachel, please. Martin.
To be slightly mischievous, therefore, we could think about whether we could get better value than spending £6,255 in Will's audit office and get an independent review. Whether it would be cheaper, I don't know. But in these straitened times, every penny counts, as somebody said.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, it has been considered in the past. I think we're acutely aware of our responsibilities as custodian of the Welsh Church Fund, and members of the committee have been consulted on this in the past, and come to the conclusion that they would prefer to maintain the current arrangement and provide that additional level of assurance for all of those bodies that are members of the consolidated fund.
Okay. Bear with me. Phil, please.
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Chair. I'd agree with that. It's something which is spread across quite a few authorities. All of those authorities rely on income from it to distribute. Some very worthy grants are made. It's a very good source of support for an awful lot of organisations. Yes, that extra degree of accountability, I think, is very important. I do accept Martin's view, but I don't think it's appropriate in this particular case.
Okay, thank you. But Martin's challenge is noted.
It was a question rather than a view.
Yeah. Noted. Okay, Ian, please.
Yeah, thanks for this. I suppose just in terms of the accounts, and I know there's a statutory format for this, but the grants payable, there is a committee that is formed from representatives from each of the local authorities to give grants. I just wonder whether it would be helpful if those people were named, just for full transparency. And also, we're giving out grants here of £163,000. I wonder at what point do we see a list or a schedule of those grants? I mean, to what degree are those confidential, or what should they be transparent? Because I don't feel, in terms of having a governance oversight here, that actually I've got much to oversight other than the fact that the balance sheet is there. So I suppose that's a question. And I do notice, obviously, that there is a marked reduction in the grants payable this year compared with last year. And we're paying less than the income received as well. So any note or explanation about some of those grant-giving policies, I think would also be quite helpful in terms of having that governance oversight.
So thanks for that. In terms of the first point around members of the committee, it isn't listed in the accounts, but it's publicly available on the Monmouthshire website, who those members are, and the committee terms of reference in terms of their responsibilities. In terms of the decision making, there was a change in that process during 2022-23. Previously, those grant awards would have gone forward to, I'm going to say council, but I think Dave's on the call, he'll correct me. I think it was probably cabinet actually, but the change was for those to be approved by individual cabinet member, which is the new process for 2022-23. Dave, is that right?
Yep. There we go. Yes, that's correct. Every authority has a different a different mechanism for awarding grants. Like Torvine will use a more of a social, responsible attitude towards giving smaller grants to lots more people, whereas Caerphilly give larger grants generally to organisations. Every authority treats grants differently. They have a different method of allocating the grants, and they all have their own mechanisms. So it's not something we could really put in the accounts. I can forward you the list of all the grants that were awarded by each authority. I have that on record if you require it. That forms part of the audit process. They do check and do test other authorities. Audit Wales do test other authorities' allocations and how they give their grants out. So it's all part of it's all available if you require it personally. But we don't publish it in the accounts because obviously sometimes there are individual names and things involved with that which are confidential.
And thanks, Dave. That's lovely. And finally, in terms of the final point, if memory serves me correctly, I think the grants that were distributed in the previous year was a catch-up year following some COVID.
Yeah, obviously. If the allocation of a grant is unspent by an authority in 1 year, they're allowed to roll that forward until they find appropriate people to actually distribute the funds to. If no one applies, then or they don't meet the criteria for receiving a grant, then the grant is kept for future distribution to worthy cause who are in need of in need of support.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and simply, Councillor Chandler, the distribution in 2021-22 was back to a normal level of distribution, so that's the differential year on year.
Are you satisfied with that, Ian?
Can I just add a little bit of additional clarification, Chair?
Yeah, go on. You go first.
All I was going to just make clear, I'm not sure that Dave or John actually made it quite clear. Each authority has its own committee. It's not one central committee. In the previous administration, it was part of the cabinet papers. So when you got the cabinet decisions coming through, and it's the same with single member anyway, there is a schedule there that says what the grants were, and so every time there's a cabinet member decision or a cabinet joint decision, the list goes out.
Okay, can I come again? Because that's confused me a little bit more, because in the accounts under grant allocation policy, it just says a committee set up by the trustees approves that. So it doesn't say there's a separate committee for each local authority. So just about clarity. But in terms of the general point, I mean, I accept, Dave, that you've got a list of grants that are available on request. Yep. I just wonder whether, for transparency's sake, we should be clearer about that in the accounts. So the accounts are a full and transparent record. And I suppose maybe it's less appropriate for this committee, but I suppose information on how organisations and individuals could apply for grants doesn't seem to be as well. I don't know how readily available that is, but obviously that is, if we're going to be truly democratic, we need to make sure that everybody can access that opportunity rather than just people in the know, if you see what I mean.
I understand. Yeah. Each website, each council website will have a website dedicated to the Welsh Church Fund, where you have the application forms and how people go about applying and the purposes to which the fund can be applied. So that is quite transparent. Obviously, I need to discuss with Peter and John if we wish to publish the list of recipients or organisations. That wouldn't be a problem, but obviously it makes the account a bit longer. And we'll take the view on GDPR as well in respect of those disclosures. So we can consider it and include it next year if it's deemed to be acceptable to all. There's no problem at all.
Okay, Peter Davis, did you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, I think Dave's probably captured it there. I think if I'll take it away. I'll have a discussion with John and Dave about it. But I guess, John, it'll be a consideration as to whether we add further disclosure to the accounts, not to the extent probably of itemising every grant payment, but actually categorising the type of grant payments and maybe just affording maybe just that one further layer of sort of transparency in terms of the grant distributions.
Peter, there is 4 categories on the already with religion and things like that already in the account. So yeah, we could categorise that, but I'd obviously have to get that information off the different authorities.
And for me, so if you could take that away, that sounds sensible. I'd be more interested in terms of having an affirmation from the trustees or possibly officers that grants are made in accordance with the rules of the trust itself, less so the actual sort of grants made. That's something I could pick up with officers outside this committee if it's unclear or they have a different view. Okay, we've drawn to a conclusion of that matter. Can I just say thank you to the officers, thank you to John and the team for putting together the accounts, thank you to Audit Wales. It's always pleasing to have an unqualified audit opinion, which is great news. In front of me I have a final letter of representation. I'm going to check with John and then Rachel that I'm in a position to sign it at this stage. John, please say yay or nay.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. I think on recommendation of the committee, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, and Rachel, are you satisfied from your perspective?
Yes, I am. Thanks, yeah.
Thank you. We will do so. So in that case, I think this committee are now in position to approve the accounts. And just to reiterate, thank you for everyone's hard work. We'll now move on to the farm school. So we'll follow the same sort of sequence. John Davis, Head of Finance, just introduced the item. Assume we've read the accounts as per usual. And then Rachel, just to talk us through the independent examiner's report. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Chair, and happy to bring forward another unqualified opinion in terms of the work that's been carried out on the Mom Farms School Endowment Trust Fund. Again, in a very similar way to the Welsh Church Fund. The drafts came before the committee back in July 2022, and the examination was carried out by Audit Wales before Christmas. So just for members to be aware, the final accounts as they've been presented to the committee today were presented to the Trust Fund Management Board on the 16th of January 23. It's my understanding that there were no issues raised. So, as I said at the outset, it was an unqualified opinion with simply some minor misstatements adjusted for in the final statement. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. We're in the sort of good position that we have a couple of trustees or members of the Fund Management Board here today at the committee. So, Phil, could you initially give us some sort of feedback from that board meeting on the 16th, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And yeah, I'm a member of the committee. I haven't got an interest to declare because it's a council appointment. The committee had a final look at these at its last meeting. I was happy with it. There was one item on there which has not appeared before. It's in other debtors. I won't say what that was because it's a very sensitive issue. What I can confirm is that it has been paid, absolutely, completely paid. So that will be off the balance sheet from now on. It wouldn't be appropriate to go any further on that.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Rachel. Rachel Freitag, Audit Wales. Talk us through the independent examiner's report, please.
Yes, so I guess just to set out that it's an independent examination, not an audit. This is due, to the small size of the trust. It's a higher level piece of work. We agree the accounts to accounting records. We do variance analysis and ensure proper presentation, but the test is not quite as detailed as a full audit. As John's already mentioned, we're intending to issue an unqualified examiner's report, which you'll see in Appendix 1. There were some minor narrative amendments, but really nothing significant at all. Assuming you approve the accounts today, both the farm and the church act will be certified by the Auditor General lunchtime tomorrow.
Thank you, Rachel. A question from me. I was just puzzled by the tense used in your report, where you talk about you intend to issue an unqualified examiner's report, not you have done. Could you just clarify why you've said that, please?
Well, we don't issue it, and we can't issue the report until after the accounts have been approved. So the Auditor General certifies after the accounts have been approved by the trust or whoever those charged with governance is. So it's just the wording of the report.
Okay, so I shouldn't read anything into that. Okay,
no, not at all. It's just a timing issue in terms of when the report's written, I suppose.
Great. Okay, I think I missed some questions. So, Colin, then, please.
Yeah, I think so. A similar comment to Councillor Chandler's comment about the church fund. Just that it's a small amount of money. It's part the Yscastasian's part of the Colin Gwent estate, and just why that fund is still operating independently from that. And given the small amount of money, what are the benefits to the recipients of that make that amount of administration necessary and beneficial? From a point of view of a lack of understanding rather than any criticism, if we could just sort of expand upon that.
So who is John? Do you want to? A big pardon, Phil. Go on.
Do you want me to say something from the actual operational point of view? We get applications from students. Some of them are starting their courses. Some are mature students. You get quite a range of students. They put in applications for things like laptops, equine equipment, chainsaws, you name it, protective clothing, all sorts of stuff associated with their courses, travelling expenses. We tend to give set amounts for some things, and as a rule of thumb, we give about a third, generally, of their claim to just generally assist them with their studies. So that's how it works in practice.
Okay, thank you, Phil.
I was just going to say, and so is the amount that's given about the amount that's sustainable by the fund then, given those numbers?
We have a set amount that we can't exceed in the course of a year. How much of it we spend depends on the applications that come forward. But generally speaking, you can pretty well say that it's mopped up, or substantially anyway.
So I was just going to come back and just say about the governance of it, really. That you don't feel that would be better administered within the Colin Gwent, or they wouldn't want to administer that fund for you.
Well, Colin Gwent are actually attend the meetings. Actually, they didn't at the last. There was an issue last time. The Colin Gwent representative was called away, but generally speaking, Colin Gwent are actually in the meeting, take part in the allocation of the funds. We have a member of the team within education in Nicky Wellington's team, who actually administers the finance of it. Colleague Gwent keep a pretty close eye on that. We also have a representative of Aberystwyth University who provide technical assistance to us. So the governance is pretty good.
Thank you. Ian, please.
Thanks. I suppose, yes, again, it's not so much a governance issue, I guess, but just following up from what Councillor Murphy just said about the limits on expenditure, I just wanted a bit of clarification, because obviously the income from the endowment was 28,000 in the year in question, but the grants was only 9,000. And it just looking, certainly for the last 2 years, there's been a substantial surplus of funds that have gone back into the fund. So, we're carrying 2/3 of £1 million in that fund, and we don't seem to be spending what is generated from the income of that. So in terms of the intention of the endowment, I don't see that the intention of the endowment is being fully fulfilled by the level of grants that are being given.
Depends on the applications, Chair. Don't forget, during that period, the students were still subject to COVID restrictions, so a lot of the things that they would normally spend, they didn't apply for. Having looked at the applications this year, they've returned to normal levels.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Thank you, Ian. Helpful question and answer. Okay, let's draw this item to a conclusion then. Firstly, thank you, John. Thanks to the team for the good work in producing these accounts, and thank you to Audit Wales for a clean bill of health. So just to conclude, we're now in a position to approve the 21-22 statement of accounts for the Farm School Endowment Trust. And we move on to item 8. Item 8 is the review of committee's terms of reference aligned to the audit plan. This paper is being introduced by Andy Woffin, Chief Internal Auditor. Andy, assume we've read the paper, really helpful, but please summarise it and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, following some comments raised by members to revise and update our work programme for the Governance and Audit Committee, I pulled a few things together to make sure that they are in line with the terms of reference of the committee's structure. Terms of reference are outlined in the Council's constitution, and they mainly stem from 2 pieces of legislation: the Local Government Measure and the more recent Local Government and Elections Wales Act. So that is taken into account within our constitution for the Council. So if I could just refer members straight through to Appendix A, the information on Appendix A and Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 is the same, but one presents the terms of reference in a portrait, the second presents it in a landscape. So it's whichever one members prefer in terms of readability, either Appendix 1 or Appendix 2. Appendix 2 does seem to be more readable in that there's more information you can put into the box. I've incorporated dates as to when the Governance and Audit Committee meetings are and what reports will be coming to you at that point, at that meeting. What I've also suggested is that we include the author, the title and the name. At present, within your current work programme, we just have a name, so we can update that as members see fit. And in terms of the linking to item 9 of your agenda, we have a work programme which is in the old format, because I didn't want to preempt anything. I wanted to get members' approval before we moved that forward and updated it for your agenda papers moving forward. So, Chair, it's just to open up to members. Would you prefer Appendix 1, Appendix 2? And are you happy to include the author, the title and the name of each report going forward, or suggest an alternative format for your work programme moving forward?
Thank you, Andy. So over to members, please, for questions and comments, and in particular answering Andy's questions. Thank you. Phil.
I think Andy's got it spot on. I think Appendix 2 is the better layout, and including the name of the individual and their job title will certainly help new members because, you know, as old hands tend to know who does what, but new people coming in certainly won't. So I think Appendix 2 with that modification. Thank you. Martin?
Yeah, I concur entirely. It's far less fussy than the first appendix, and I'm assured that it matches across the terms of reference, and that's where we'll make sure we cover all the gaps. There isn't anything falling through. Just one sort of thing which I'm not sure of, because this is the first non-election year, 2023, that I've been involved in this committee. Just understanding the dates, because obviously we didn't meet until June last year. I presume the date structure might change slightly in terms of 2023, and those dates are in discussion, I presume. Just a general plea: the sooner dates are in diaries, the better for everyone. But I guess that's more of a corporate issue.
It is, but I do note there's some draft dates on the website. Wendy, do you want to speak to that?
I believe that the council calendar went to council last week, so yeah.
Okay, so it goes to elected members but not lay members for information.
Right.
It has to be approved by council, and it was approved last week.
It's a bit late to object to turning the dates then. Okay, thanks.
Well, I won't make any comments on that, but yeah, okay. Okay, but no further questions or comments. So, Andy, you've knocked out the park, the Appendix 2. So thank you for your paper. We will go with Appendix 2 with suitably amended, as Andy suggested, and the committee's agreed with. So thank you. Right, we're now on to item 9, which is the work programme. If I could draw your attention to the papers proposed for next month, which next month's committee meeting was on the 16th, only a few weeks away. You will recall from the pre-meet that we have asked Andy Waffen, Chief Internal Auditor, who's agreed to draft a short paper on the potential implications arising from the proposed audit vacancy being removed from its structure as part of the authority's expense challenge. So Andy's agreed to that. We will add that to the agenda, please, Wendy, and we will have a discussion on that topic at that time. The papers for the meetings further out are there. Well, beg pardon, only one for March. There's nothing else further on the forward work programme, but happy to take any questions or comments as you see fit. Oh, Andy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up a comment that members have made previously. In March, I'm due to bring to you a Q3 report that relates to 31st of December. If members are happy, I'll bring that forward to the February meeting.
Okay. Ian, please.
I suppose I'm looking at a February agenda, and I'm a little bit sort of taken aback by how much we're going to have to go through. And then Andrew is just suggesting that we put a Q3 report there as well. So it's more, I don't know, how feasible is that? I mean, I know some of them come together, and I know they're all important things that we have to and want to discuss. I suppose that's just a question really to you, Chair, in terms of how realistic do you think that is?
I think that's a really fair challenge. Yeah, Peter Davis, did you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, I agree with you, Chair. I think it's a fair point made. I guess what we can do, and we don't need to work it through now, but I think we can probably look through the agenda for the 16th of February. There are some of those items that will absolutely have to go in on the 16th. Some of them we may be best just chatting them through, because I think it won't be the end of the world if they do get repositioned to the 30th of March. So if we take that away as an action to get see if we can get a better balance. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's a great idea. No further questions or comments. Right, that takes on then to the minutes of the previous meeting. As per usual, we'll just turn the pages quickly. I'll do it very quickly, so please shout out if you have any sort of issues with either the factual accuracy or indeed matters arising. I'll just get to my right page number. In my pack, I'm starting at page 105, then 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113. I take your silence as accepting the minutes. I think we propose and second, and could someone propose
I propose
the minutes?
that,
Thank you, Phil, and Ian to second. Thank you. Right, just to confirm the date of next meeting, as we just referred to, 16th of Feb, but just a few weeks away. Could I say thank you one and all for your attendance, for your contribution? It is much appreciated. And Wendy, I think we are done. Yeah. Hey, well.